The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stood empty except for the shadows. 50 years ago, this same room buzzed with the voices of 300 different species. Representatives from across the galaxy would gather here to discuss trade, solve disputes, and build a better future together. Now only 47 species remained, and most of them sat in silence. Ambassador Kethvar adjusted his green scales nervously as he watched the Zephyrian soldiers march into the chamber. Their black armor made clicking sounds against the marble floor. Each soldier stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms and faces that looked like metal masks. They carried weapons that could turn a person into dust in seconds. The Saurian diplomat remembered when his people first joined the council 60 years ago. Back then, the humans had greeted them with warm smiles and helped them set up their embassy. The humans always seemed to know what to say to make everyone feel welcome. They had a way of bringing different species together, even when they disagreed about important things. But the humans were gone now. They had simply vanished one day 50 years ago without any explanation. Their ships had disappeared from space. Their colonies had been abandoned. Even their home world of Earth had gone silent. Some said they had been destroyed by an unknown enemy. Others believed they had found a new galaxy to explore. Most people had stopped wondering about it years ago. Queen General Ziska entered the chamber with heavy footsteps. She was the largest Zephyrian anyone had ever seen. Standing 12 feet tall with 6 arms instead of the usual 4, her exoskeleton was dark purple, marking her as royalty among her people. Behind her walked 20 more soldiers, their weapons ready. "Sit down, all of you," Ziska commanded in her harsh voice. The translator devices everyone wore made her words sound like grinding metal. "We have much to discuss today." The remaining ambassadors took their seats quickly. Kethvar noticed how they all looked at the floor instead of meeting the Queen General's eyes. Fear had become their constant companion over the past 10 years. Ziska moved to the center of the room, where a human diplomat named Ambassador Williams used to stand. Williams had been a small woman with gray hair, but somehow she had commanded respect from everyone. She could calm down angry Zephyrians and convince stubborn crystalline beings to change their minds. The humans had that gift. "The Centauri Mining Consortium has failed to meet their tribute requirements," Ziska announced. Her multiple eyes scanned the room like a hunter looking for prey. Ambassador Jexal explained this failure. A small blue creature with tentacles for arms stood up shakily. Jexal represented the Centauri miners, a peaceful species that had joined the council to sell their rare metals. "Your Majesty, our people are working as hard as they can. The mines are producing at maximum capacity. We cannot extract more without destroying the planets." "Excuses," Ziska hissed. "Your people are lazy. They need proper motivation." She gestured to one of her soldiers. The warrior stepped forward and activated a device that projected images into the air above them. The pictures showed Centauri workers in metal cages, digging with their bare hands while Zephyrian guards watched over them. "These are your new work sites," Ziska explained with satisfaction. "Much more efficient than your old methods. Production has increased by 200% since we implemented proper supervision." Jexal's tentacles trembled. "Those are slave camps. You promised the council that you would only provide security assistance." "I provided exactly what your people needed," the Queen General replied coldly. "Results." Kethvar felt sick looking at the images. He remembered when the Zephyrians first appeared in council space 15 years ago. They had seemed aggressive but not necessarily evil. Their representatives claimed they only wanted to help maintain peace and order in the galaxy. Many species, tired of constant small wars and pirate raids, had welcomed the offer. The Zephyrians had been clever about their conquest. They never attacked directly. Instead, they offered protection services to smaller species. When pirates threatened trade routes, Zephyrian ships would arrive to drive them away. When disputes arose between neighboring worlds, Zephyrian mediators would step in to find solutions. Slowly, species became dependent on them. Then the bills started arriving. Protection services cost money. Mediation required payment. Species that could not pay found their protection withdrawn at convenient moments. Pirates would attack just days after Zephyrian ships left the area. Disputes would flare up again without Zephyrian mediators. The message became clear: pay or suffer. "Ambassador Kethvar," Ziska's voice cut through his thoughts. "Your people have been discussing reduction of their security contributions. This concerns us." The Saurian diplomat stood slowly. His people were one of the few species that still had some independence, mainly because their world was far from major trade routes. and produced little of value to the Zephyrians. But even that small freedom was now under threat. The Saurian Collective has never missed a payment, Kethavar said carefully. We have simply questioned whether the current rates are necessary. Our space has been peaceful for many years. Peace exists because we maintain it, Ziska replied. Remove our protection and chaos returns. Surely you remember the lessons of the Vegan uprising. Everyone in the room knew about Vega 7th. The small farming world had tried to declare independence from Zephyrian protection 3 years ago. Within a month, their crops had been destroyed by a mysterious plague. Their water supplies had been contaminated by unknown toxins. Pirates had attacked their shipping routes daily. The planet had surrendered and agreed to triple tribute payments within 6 weeks. The Zephyrians claimed they had nothing to do with Vega 7's problems. They said they were simply too busy with other duties to provide protection. But everyone knew the truth. The timing had been too perfect to be coincidence. Of course, Your Majesty, Kethavar said quietly. The Saurian Collective values your protection highly. Good. Zisika turned to address the entire assembly. Now we come to the main purpose of today's gathering. Several species in the Outer Rim have been refusing our protection offers. They claim they can defend themselves. This is unacceptable. She gestured again and new images appeared. These showed star maps with dozens of systems marked in red. Kethavar recognized some of them. The resonance crystals of Altair, the cloud dancers of the nebula region, the tree shepherds of the forest worlds, all peaceful species that had avoided major contact with galactic politics for centuries. These worlds will accept proper protection within 30 days, Siska announced. Those that refuse will be classified as rogue systems and dealt with accordingly. Ambassador Veltar of the Crystal Collective stood up. The crystalline being's body reflected light in patterns that showed distress. Your Majesty, many of these species have never even joined the Galactic Council. They are not subject to our authority. Authority comes from strength, Siska replied. We are strong enough to bring order to chaos. They are too weak to resist. Mathematics is simple. Kethavar watched the faces around the room. He saw fear, but also something else, anger, disgust. The same emotions he felt building in his own chest. But what could they do? The species that had tried to resist the Zephyrians had been crushed quickly and brutally. Those that survived were now examples for others. The meeting continued for another 3 hours. More tribute demands, more threats disguised as protective offers, more systems marked for integration into the Zephyrian sphere of influence. By the time Ziska dismissed them, the galaxy had grown smaller and darker. As the ambassadors filed out of the chamber, Kethavar noticed several empty seats. The representatives of 6 species that had attended the last meeting were missing today. He did not need to ask what had happened to them. Some had fled to the Outer Rim. Others had simply stopped coming, knowing their voices no longer mattered. Walking back to his embassy, Kethavar passed through the old human district. The buildings stood empty, their windows dark. Dust covered the signs that once advertised human restaurants and shops. Nature was slowly reclaiming the carefully maintained gardens. He stopped at the memorial that someone had built for the missing humans. It was simple, a stone marker with words in several languages. They brought us together, it said in Standard Galactic. We hope they found peace among the stars. Looking at those words, Kethavar felt something he had not experienced in years. Hope. Not because he believed the humans would return. That was impossible after 50 years. But because he remembered what the galaxy had been like when they were here. The humans had not been the strongest species. Their ships were not the fastest, and their weapons were not the most powerful. But they had possessed something that made them different. They had refused to accept that might made right. When bullies appeared, humans stood up to them. When the weak needed protection, humans provided it without asking for payment. Most importantly, the humans had taught other species to work together. Before they arrived, the galaxy had been divided into thousands of small groups, each suspicious of the others. The humans had convinced them that cooperation made everyone stronger than they could ever be alone. Now those lessons seemed forgotten. The Zephyrians had proven that fear was more powerful than hope. They had shown that individual species could not stand against organized strength. The galaxy was learning to accept that freedom was less important than safety, even if that safety came with chains. But in the deepest part of space, far from the Zephyrian patrols and council politics, something was watching. Automated stations that had been silent for 50 years continued their patient observations. They recorded every Zephyrian threat, every species that fled in terror, every world that fell under the shadow of forced protection, deep in hidden facilities that no living being had seen for decades. Machines maintained their vigil. They tended to systems that had been designed to run for centuries without intervention. They watched over chambers where time moved differently, where 50 years passed like a single breath. The galaxy had forgotten the humans, but the humans had not forgotten the galaxy. They slept the long sleep, but their electronic guardians never closed their eyes. Every act of Zephyrian cruelty was recorded. Every species that suffered was noted. Every world that needed help was marked for future reference. In the deepest vaults, where even the machines rarely went, quantum computers processed information at speeds that would have amazed the greatest scientists. They built models of galactic politics, tracking every change and predicting future developments. They calculated probabilities and planned responses to situations that had not yet occurred. The humans had not fled in fear or defeat. They had made a choice based on cold logic and long-term thinking. They had seen that their presence was changing the galaxy in ways they did not like. Some species were becoming dependent on human protection. Others were growing resentful of human influence. The balance they had tried to create was becoming unstable. So they had removed themselves from the equation. They had given the galaxy a chance to find its own path, to learn its own lessons. They had hoped that without the human presence to unite against or rely upon, species would find ways to cooperate on their own terms. They had been wrong. But they had planned for that possibility too. As Kethvar returned to his empty embassy, as Queen General Ziska planned new conquests, as species across the galaxy prepared for another day of fear and submission, the Silent Watchers continued their work. Numbers were calculated. Projections were updated. Somewhere in the depths of space, a decision was approaching. The long sleep would not last forever. The galaxy had been given its chance to choose between cooperation and domination. It had made its choice clear. Soon, very soon, it would be time for the humans to make theirs. But for now, the darkness continued to spread, and hope seemed as distant as the missing humans themselves. The screaming started at dawn on Resonance Prime. The Crystal Collective had always been a peaceful species, their cities built from living crystal that sang beautiful music when the wind passed through them. For 1,000 years, their world had known only harmony. That harmony died with the sunrise. Zephyrian dropships fell from the sky like black rain. They landed in perfect formation around the major crystal cities, their engines scorching the delicate mineral gardens that the Resonance had tended for centuries. Within hours, the singing crystals were silent, replaced by the harsh mechanical sounds of Zephyrian war machines. Ambassador Veltar watched the invasion from his office in the council chambers, 200 light-years away. The communication feed from his homeworld showed Zephyrian soldiers herding his people into containment areas. The crystalline beings offered no resistance. Violence was unknown to their culture. They simply did not understand what was happening to them. Your people are learning the benefits of proper organization, Queen General Ziska said from behind him. She had entered his office without permission, as was her custom now. Privacy was another concept that the Zephyrians were eliminating from the galaxy. You promised them protection, Veltar said without turning around. His crystalline body had turned dark gray, a sign of deep distress among his kind. You said they only needed to accept council authority. They are being protected, Ziska replied with amusement. Protected from their own inefficiency. Your people spent too much time singing and not enough time working. We are correcting that imbalance. On the screen, Zephyrian engineers were installing massive mining equipment among the crystal formations. The ancient songs that had taken millennia to perfect were being destroyed in minutes. Each broken crystal represented hundreds of years of careful cultivation, lost forever. The resonance crystals are not just minerals, Veltar explained desperately. They are our children, our art, our history. You cannot simply harvest them like ordinary stones. We can harvest whatever produces value, Ziska corrected him. Your crystals will power Zephyrian communication networks across the galaxy, a much better use than making pretty sounds for tourists. The Queen General gestured to one of her aides, who handed her a data pad. She studied it briefly, then smiled in the way that made other species' blood run cold. The Nebula Dancers have also accepted our offer of protection, she announced. They were very reasonable once they saw what happened to the Crystal Collective. Veltar knew about the Nebula Dancers. They were beings of living gas who existed in the cloud formations between stars. They had never harmed anyone, never even made contact with most galactic civilizations. They simply danced among the cosmic dust, creating patterns of beauty that could be seen from space. What could you possibly want from them? Veltar asked. Their knowledge of stellar navigation, Ziska explained. They understand space currents better than our best scientists. With their guidance, our ships will travel faster than ever before. Military applications are endless. The Zephyrians had become masters of finding military applications for everything. Art became propaganda. Science became weapons research. Even philosophy was twisted into methods of population control. They took the best qualities of other species and turned them into tools of conquest. 3 months later, Ambassador Kethvar sat in an emergency meeting with the few remaining independent species. The gathering was small and secret, held in a forgotten conference room deep in the council complex. Only 12 ambassadors attended, representing the last free voices in the galaxy. We cannot continue like this, whispered Ambassador Thelna of the Tree Shepherds. Her people were plant-like beings who had spent thousands of years growing vast forests on dead worlds. The Zephyrians are demanding that we convert our forest worlds into industrial complexes. They want to use our trees as raw material for their shipyards. At least your people still exist, said Ambassador Vorak bitterly. His species, the Storm Riders, had tried to resist Zephyrian expansion 6 months ago. They had been brave fighters, using their natural ability to control electrical energy as weapons. It had not mattered. The Zephyrians had simply targeted their breeding grounds with biological weapons. Only a few thousand Storm Riders remained, scattered across the galaxy as refugees. Kethvar looked around the small group and saw his own fear reflected in their faces. These were the survivors, the species that had been too small, too far away, or too useful to be completely destroyed. But their time was running out. Has anyone heard from the Outer Rim colonies? He asked quietly. The worlds that fled council space? The answers came in whispers and shaking heads. The Freehaven colony had gone silent 2 weeks ago. The independent mining consortium had stopped all communications. Even the notorious pirate bases that operated beyond council authority had vanished without explanation. They are hunting down everyone who refuses to submit, Thelna said. Distance means nothing to them. They have ships we have never seen before, technology that makes their old vessels look primitive. It was true. The Zephyrian fleet had grown enormously over the past year. New ship designs appeared regularly, incorporating technologies stolen from conquered species, crystal-powered engines from the Resonance Collective, navigation systems based on Nebula Dancer knowledge, weapons that used Storm Rider electrical techniques. Each conquest made them stronger. We need help, Vorak said desperately. Someone has to stop them before they control everything. Who? Kethvar asked. What species in the galaxy has the strength to challenge them now? They have absorbed the best qualities of dozens of civilizations. Their military grows stronger every day. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. There had been one species that might have stood against the Zephyrians, one civilization that had never feared a fight when freedom was at stake. But the humans were gone, lost to history and legend. Sometimes I wonder what really happened to them, Thelna said softly. The humans, I mean. They just disappeared so suddenly. No explanation, no goodbye, nothing. Does it matter? Vorak replied harshly. They abandoned us when we needed them most. They ran away and left us to face this alone. Kethvar shook his head. The humans never ran from anything. That is what made them so dangerous to their enemies and so valuable to their friends. If they disappeared, they had a reason. Maybe they saw what was coming, suggested Ambassador Lindar of the Water Dancers. Her species had avoided conquest by agreeing to provide the Zephyrians with water purification services. It was degrading work for beings who had once created oceanic art forms, but it kept them alive. Maybe they knew that species like the Zephyrians would eventually rise to power, and they did not want to be part of it. Or maybe they found something more important than the Council, Thelna added. A new galaxy to explore, or enemies that threatened all life everywhere. The speculation continued, but Kethvar stopped listening. He had heard all these theories before. Everyone had their own explanation for the human disappearance. The truth was that no one knew what had happened, and after 50 years, most people had stopped caring. The humans were just another extinct species, like so many others throughout galactic history. But late at night, when the fear kept him awake, Kethvar would remember stories his grandfather had told him about the human warriors, how they never retreated when protecting their friends, how they would fight against impossible odds if they believed their cause was right, how they had a saying, "We do not abandon our own." If that was true, then why had they abandoned the galaxy? The next day brought news that made everyone's theories meaningless. The Zephyrians announced that they were dissolving the Galactic Council completely. The pretense of cooperation was over. From now on, all species would report directly to Zephyrian administrators. The council chambers would be converted into military headquarters. Queen General Ziska made the announcement personally, standing in the same spot where hundreds of species had once gathered to discuss peace and cooperation. Her soldiers lined the walls, their weapons clearly visible. The message was unmistakable. The age of diplomacy was over. "The council has served its purpose," she declared. "It brought different species together, so we could identify their strengths and weaknesses. Now we will use that knowledge to build a proper galactic order." She gestured to the empty seats around the chamber. Most species no longer bothered sending representatives. There was no point in attending meetings where your voice did not matter. "Some of you may feel sad about this change," Zisika continued. "You remember when this room was full of noise and argument. You think that was better than the peace we have brought. You are wrong." Her multiple eyes scanned the few remaining ambassadors. Each gaze felt like a physical weight, pressing down on their spirits. "Arguments create conflict. Conflict creates war. War creates suffering. We have eliminated argument, so we have eliminated suffering. This is progress." Kethvar wanted to stand up and scream that she was wrong. Argument was not the enemy of peace. It was the foundation of understanding. When different species could express their views freely, they could find solutions that worked for everyone. When only one voice was allowed to speak, that voice became the definition of truth, whether it was right or wrong. But he remained silent like all the others. Speaking out now would only result in his people joining the growing list of extinct species. The ceremony continued with the formal reading of new regulations. All interstellar travel required Zephyrian permits. All trade agreements needed Zephyrian approval. All communication between species had to go through Zephyrian channels. Freedom of movement, freedom of trade, and freedom of speech were ending simultaneously. "You may wonder how we will manage such a large galaxy with so few Zephyrian administrators," Ziska said near the end of her speech. "The answer is simple. We will not manage it ourselves. Each species will police its own people according to our guidelines. Those who fail to maintain proper order will be replaced by species that can." The threat was clear. Any world that caused trouble would see its population replaced by more cooperative beings from other planets. The Zephyrians had enough conquered species now to make this possible. They could move entire populations around like pieces on a game board. As the ambassadors filed out of the chamber for the last time, Kethvar noticed something that made his blood run cold. Zephyrian technicians were already removing the translation devices from each seat. Soon only Zephyrian language would be spoken in this room. All other voices would be silenced forever. Walking through the corridors that had once bustled with diplomatic activity, Kethvar saw workers covering the walls with Zephyrian symbols. The beautiful artwork that different species had contributed over the decades was being painted over with harsh black and purple designs. Even the architecture of cooperation was being erased. That night, alone in his embassy, Kethvar tried to contact his homeworld. The communication channels were full of Zephyrian oversight programs now. Every word he spoke would be recorded and analyzed. Privacy had become another casualty of the new order. "Report your status," came the automated message in Zephyrian language. "Ambassador Kethvar reporting," he replied in Standard Galactic, though he doubted anyone still cared about the old diplomatic protocols. "Switch to Zephyrian language for official communication," the system demanded. Kethvar closed his eyes and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He switched to the harsh mechanical language of his conquerors. Outside his window, the lights of the council district were going out one by one. Each darkened building represented another species that had given up hope. Soon this entire section of the station would be empty except for Zephyrian administrators and the few collaborators they needed to maintain order. But in the deepest parts of space, far from Zephyrian sensors and beyond their expanding empire, other lights were beginning to shine. Lights that had been waiting patiently for 50 years, maintaining systems that most of the galaxy had forgotten existed. Lights that belonged to the species everyone assumed was extinct. The humans had been watching. They had seen every conquest, recorded every atrocity, and calculated the cost of every Zephyrian victory. Their electronic guardians had been patient observers, but patience was not the same as inaction. Deep in their hidden facilities, machines were beginning to activate systems that had been dormant for half a century. The galaxy had made its choice between freedom and security. It had chosen to accept chains in exchange for safety. The humans had given everyone the opportunity to prove that cooperation was possible without their guidance. That experiment had failed completely. Soon, very soon, it would be time to remind the galaxy what real strength looked like when it was used to protect the innocent instead of enslaving them. The Zephyrians had spent 50 years learning how to conquer through fear. They were about to discover what happened when that fear met a species that had never learned how to surrender. Deep in the Kepler Nebula, where stellar dust made detection nearly impossible, the artificial intelligence designated Atlas 7 completed its 50-year analysis. The massive quantum computer had been processing data continuously since the humans entered their long sleep, watching the galaxy change through millions of sensors and listening posts scattered across space. The results were worse than even the most pessimistic projections had predicted. Atlas 7 had been designed by the finest human minds to think beyond normal timescales. Where most species planned in years or decades, humans had learned to think in centuries. The artificial intelligence had been given one simple directive: determine when the galaxy needed the humans to return. For 5 decades, it had watched civilizations rise and fall. It had recorded the Zephyrian expansion with cold precision, documenting every conquest and cataloging every atrocity. It had seen species flee to the outer rim only to be hunted down by improved Zephyrian technology. It had watched the slow death of freedom across thousands of worlds. The AI's calculations were complete. The galaxy had failed the test. In the depths of Facility Prime, buried beneath 3 miles of asteroid rock, Admiral Sarah Chen felt the first stirring of consciousness in 50 years. The cryochamber around her began its revival sequence with a soft hum that had been silent since she had last closed her eyes in 2387. She had been 45 years old then, a career military officer who had never expected to live to see the year 2437. The awakening process was gentle but thorough. Nanomachines in her bloodstream began repairing the minor cellular damage that even the best cryosystems could not completely prevent. Her brain chemistry was carefully rebalanced as neural pathways that had been dormant for half a century slowly came back online. Chen's first conscious thought was a question: how long? 50 years, 3 months, and 16 days, replied the facility's AI in a voice she recognized. Dr. Martinez had insisted on programming all the AIs with human speech patterns to make the awakening less disorienting. The long sleep protocol has been terminated. The long watch protocol is now active. Memories flooded back as Chen's mind fully awakened. The emergency sessions in the Human Council, the terrible decision they had been forced to make. The looks on the faces of her fellow officers as they had agreed to abandon the galaxy they had spent centuries helping to build. What is the current galactic situation? She asked as the cryochamber opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Severe degradation of cooperative institutions, the AI replied. The Zephyrian Empire now controls approximately 78% of Council space. Resistance has been eliminated or driven to the outer rim. The Galactic Council has been dissolved. An estimated 43 species have been rendered extinct since our departure. Chen stepped out of the chamber on unsteady legs. Her body remembered how to move, but 50 years of inactivity left her feeling weak and disoriented. Around her, hundreds of other chambers were beginning their own revival sequences. The sounds of machinery and returning life filled the vast underground facility. "Show me the strategic overview," she ordered. The walls around her transformed into a three-dimensional display of the galaxy. Chen had studied similar maps before entering cryo-sleep, but this one was painted in the harsh colors of conquest. Zephyrian territory appeared in dark purple, spreading across the map like a disease. The few remaining free systems showed as tiny green dots scattered around the galactic rim. "The Saurian Collective still maintains nominal independence," the AI continued. "However, they are completely dependent on Zephyrian protection services. The Crystal Collective has been enslaved for resource extraction. The Nebula Dancers have been forced into navigation service. 17 species have been relocated from their homeworlds to serve Zephyrian industrial needs." Chen studied the map, with the eyes of someone who had spent 30 years planning for this exact scenario. The humans had not disappeared randomly. Every aspect of their withdrawal had been carefully calculated to give other species the best possible chance of maintaining peaceful cooperation. They had removed themselves as a potential threat that other species might unite against. They had eliminated human military power that some civilizations had become dependent on. They had given the galaxy space to grow and develop its own solutions to conflict. The experiment had been a complete failure. "Activate Revival Protocol 7, Chen ordered. "Begin awakening senior staff and department heads. I want a full briefing in 6 hours." Around her, the facility came alive with activity. Humans began emerging from cryochambers throughout the complex, their faces showing the same mixture of disorientation and grim determination that Chen felt. These were not ordinary colonists or civilians. Every person in Facility Prime was a specialist selected for their expertise in warfare, diplomacy, or administration. Chen walked through corridors that had been empty for 50 years, past rooms full of equipment that had been maintained by automated systems throughout the long sleep. She paused at a window that looked out into space where stars that had seemed distant when she went to sleep now felt like old friends welcoming her home. "Admiral Chen?" The voice belonged to Colonel Torres, her former chief of staff. He looked exactly as she remembered him, preserved by the same cryosystems that had kept her young. Only his eyes showed the weight of what they had all given up to make this plan work. "It's good to see you, Miguel," Chen replied. "How are you feeling?" "Like I went to sleep 50 years ago and woke up in a nightmare," Torres answered honestly. "The briefing files are terrifying. The Zephyrians have conquered more territory than the old hegemony wars ever touched." Chen nodded grimly. The hegemony wars had been the last great galactic conflict before humans joined the Council. They had lasted 300 years and left entire sectors uninhabitable. The humans had helped create the Council system specifically to prevent such conflicts from happening again. "The difference is that the hegemonies fought each other," Chen pointed out. "The Zephyrians have no opposition. They've created the first true galactic empire in recorded history." Other senior officers began arriving in the briefing room. General Park, who had planned defensive strategies for 100 different species. Captain Rodriguez, the best intelligence officer in human space. Dr. Yates, who understood alien psychology better than most aliens understood themselves. Each face showed the same shocked comprehension as they absorbed what had happened during their long sleep. "How did we get it so wrong?" asked General Park. Her specialty had been predicting military threats, and she looked personally offended that the Zephyrians had exceeded her worst-case projections. "Our model suggested they would be aggressive, but nothing like this." Dr. Yates pulled up psychological profiles on the main display. "We underestimated their ability to adapt and learn. The Zephyrians we studied 50 years ago were brutal, but limited in scope. These new ones have incorporated the best strategies and technologies from every species they've conquered. They're not the same civilization anymore. They've evolved," Chen realized. "They started as simple predators, but conquest has made them into something much more dangerous. They've learned to use other species' strengths against them." Captain Rodriguez nodded agreement. "According to the intelligence files, they've created a perfect system of control. They don't destroy species anymore. They absorb them. Every conquest makes them stronger and gives them new capabilities." Chen studied the strategic display again, looking for weaknesses in the Zephyrian position. Their territory was vast but thin in places. Their supply lines stretched across enormous distances. Their conquered species might be controlled, but that control required constant attention and resources. "What about resistance movements?" she asked. "There have to be underground groups fighting back." "Minimal and ineffective," Torres reported. The Zephyrians learned from early mistakes. They relocate entire populations to break up cultural connections. They mix species together so no group can organize effectively. They use conquered species as administrators for other conquered species, creating artificial divisions. "Divide and conquer," Chen said. "One of the oldest strategies in history, but they've perfected it." Dr. Yates highlighted sections of the psychological analysis. "The most disturbing part is how they've convinced most species that resistance is hopeless. They've created a culture of submission that reinforces itself. People believe that Zephyrian rule is inevitable, so they don't even try to fight back." Chen had seen this before in human history. Totalitarian systems that made their own existence seem like natural law. The key to breaking such systems was proving that resistance was possible, that the seemingly invincible enemy could be defeated. "How many facilities like this one are still operational?" she asked. 17 confirmed, 3 more probable," Torres replied. Total human population in cryosleep is approximately 2 million military personnel and specialists, plus another 8 million civilians in deep space colonies. 10 million humans against a galactic empire that controlled billions of beings across thousands of worlds. The odds seemed impossible, but Chen remembered that humans had faced impossible odds before. They had a talent for turning disadvantages into advantages. "What about our industrial base?" she continued. "Production capabilities?" "Extensive," Colonel Martinez reported. He had been in charge of the automated manufacturing systems that had been operating throughout the long sleep. "Our shipyards have been producing vessels and equipment continuously for 50 years. We have a fleet of approximately 12,000 ships of various classes, all incorporating improvements developed during your absence." Chen felt the first spark of hope since awakening. 12,000 ships was not a large fleet by galactic standards, but human technology had never been about quantity. Human engineers had always focused on making every ship, every weapon, and every soldier as effective as possible. "Show me the new designs," she ordered. The display filled with technical specifications that made Chen's eyes widen. The ships looked like nothing she had ever seen before. They were sleek and angular, built with technologies that seemed almost organic in their complexity. Stealth systems that could hide entire fleets, weapons that could pierce any known armor, shields that adapted to different types of attack. "These are incredible," she breathed. "How long have the AIs been working on these improvements?" "Since the day you entered cryosleep," Martinez replied with pride. "We gave them 50 years to solve every tactical problem they could imagine. They've designed ships that can fight the Zephyrian Empire as it exists today, not as it was when we left." Dr. Yates brought up another display showing population and resource analyses. "The Zephyrians have made one critical mistake. They've conquered so many species that their empire is actually quite fragile. They depend on cooperation from billions of beings who hate them. If that cooperation breaks down, the entire system could collapse." "But how do we break it down?" Torres asked. "The conquered species are scattered and demoralized. Most of them don't even know that resistance is possible." Chen smiled for the first time since awakening. It was not a pleasant expression. "We remind them who they used to be. We show them what freedom looks like. We prove that the Zephyrians are not invincible." She turned to address the entire group. "The long sleep protocol was based on hope. We hoped that other species would learn to cooperate without our guidance. That hope was misplaced. The long watch protocol is based on something more reliable." "What's that?" asked General Park. "The knowledge that when peaceful cooperation fails, sometimes violence is the only way to restore justice," Chen replied. "The Zephyrians have spent 50 years learning how to conquer through fear. Now they're going to learn what happens when that fear meets a species that never forgot how to fight for what's right." Around the room, faces that had shown despair began to show determination. These were humans who had given up 50 years of their lives to protect a galaxy that had forgotten them. They had awakened to find that galaxy enslaved and broken, but they were still alive, still free, and still capable of fighting back. "Begin Phase 1 of the Long Watch Protocol," Chen ordered. "Start with reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. I want to know everything about current Zephyrian capabilities and weaknesses. Then we begin reminding the galaxy that freedom is still possible. In facilities across human space, similar scenes were playing out. Admirals and generals awakening to find their worst nightmares realized. Scientists and engineers discovering that their automated systems had spent 50 years preparing for war. Diplomats learning that diplomacy had died while they slept. The humans were back, and they were not the same species that had left. 50 years of careful planning and preparation had forged them into something new. They had always been warriors when necessary, but now they were warriors with a purpose that transcended their own survival. The galaxy had chosen submission over freedom. It had accepted chains in exchange for safety. But the humans had never learned to accept injustice, no matter how powerful the forces that enforced it. The Zephyrians had created the perfect galactic empire. They were about to discover that perfection was just another word for brittleness, and that even the mightiest structures could shatter when struck by someone who remembered what they were fighting for. The first sign that something had changed came on a Tuesday morning in Zephyrian space. Commander Vexthi was reviewing supply reports from the Centauri mining operations when his communication systems went completely silent. Not damaged or jammed, but simply quiet in a way that made his exoskeleton crawl with unease. "Communications officer," he barked to his subordinate. "Why are we not receiving updates from Mining Station 7? The younger Zephyrian checked his instruments nervously. "Sir, all communication channels are functioning normally. Mining Station 7 is simply not responding to our calls." Vexthi's forearms tapped against his command chair in irritation. Mining Station 7 processed rare metals essential for Zephyrian ship construction. Any interruption in production would reflect poorly on his performance record. And Queen General Ziska had been executing commanders who disappointed her lately. "Send a patrol ship to investigate," he ordered. "I want answers within the hour." The patrol ship reached Mining Station 7 40 minutes later. The facility appeared normal from the outside. Its lights were on, its equipment was running, and its defensive shields were operational. But when the patrol ship tried to dock, they found the station's communication arrays had been surgically removed. Not destroyed by weapons fire, but carefully disconnected by someone who understood exactly how Zephyrian technology worked. Inside the station, they found the Zephyrian guards unconscious but unharmed. The Centauri workers were missing, along with all the processed metals from the past month. Security recordings showed nothing but static during the 12-hour period when the theft had occurred. Similar reports began reaching Zephyrian command centers across the galaxy over the following weeks. Supply convoys would arrive at their destinations to find their cargo holds empty, though the seals had never been broken. Communication relays would fall silent for hours before resuming operation, with no explanation for the interruption. Patrol ships would report sensor ghosts that appeared and disappeared too quickly to identify. Queen General Ziska listened to these reports with growing fury. Her empire had run with perfect efficiency for years, and now mysterious technical failures were occurring daily. Worse, the failures seemed to be getting more sophisticated. "How do supply containers disappear from sealed cargo holds?" she demanded of her chief engineer. "How do communication arrays vanish without triggering any security alerts?" Engineer Prime Colvin studied the data with obvious confusion. "The techniques being used are beyond our current understanding, Your Majesty. Whoever is responsible has technology we have never encountered." "Technology from which species?" Ziska asked dangerously. "We have conquered everyone with advanced capabilities. The remaining free systems barely have spaceflight." "That is what troubles us," Colvin admitted. "The energy signatures we are detecting do not match any known species in our databases. But they do match theoretical projections from some of our oldest intelligence files." "Show me." The engineer activated a holographic display that showed energy patterns and technological signatures. Most of them were familiar Zephyrian designs or variations created by conquered species. But scattered among them were readings that seemed almost organic in their complexity. "These patterns appear in intelligence reports from 60 years ago," Colvin explained. "They were classified as theoretical projections of how human technology might develop, if given unlimited resources and time." Ziska's multiple eyes focused on the display with predatory intensity. "The humans are extinct. They disappeared 50 years ago." "Yes, Your Majesty. That is what makes these readings so disturbing. Either someone has developed similar technology independently or the humans were never extinct at all," Ziska finished. The possibility sent chills through her exoskeleton. Human warriors had been legendary for their stubbornness and refusal to surrender. If they had been hiding for 50 years preparing for revenge, the Queen General's fears proved justified 3 days later. Ambassador Kethvar was packing his belongings when the announcement came. With the Galactic Council dissolved, there was no point in maintaining a Saurian embassy. His people had been ordered to report to their new Zephyrian administrators within the week. He was sealing the last container of documents when every screen in the building activated simultaneously. The displays had been shut down for days, but they turned on by themselves, all showing the same image. It was a flag that Kethvar had not seen for 50 years. Blue background with white stars arranged in the pattern of Earth's night sky, and in the center, the green and brown shape of humanity's homeworld. The flag of the Terran Federation, displayed with digital clarity that made it seem to glow with life. Below the flag, words appeared in every major galactic language. The message was simple: "We're back." Across the galaxy, the same message appeared on every screen, every communication device, and every information display simultaneously. Zephyrian security systems tried desperately to block or trace the signal, but it passed through their defenses as if they did not exist. In the old council chambers, Queen General Zisika stared at the message with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Around her, Zephyrian technicians worked frantically to restore control of their systems. "How is this possible?" she demanded. "How did they penetrate every security network in the Empire?" Her communications officer looked terrified to deliver bad news. "Your Majesty, the signal is not coming from any external source. It appears to be originating from within our own systems, as if the message was already there waiting to be activated." The implications were staggering. If the humans had been able to plant messages in Zephyrian systems without detection, what else might they have hidden? How long had they been watching and preparing? The answer came 6 hours later when Admiral Sarah Chen walked into the council chambers. She entered alone, without guards or weapons visible, but her presence transformed the entire room. The Zephyrian soldiers who had seemed so intimidating suddenly appeared nervous and uncertain. Their weapons remained ready, but they seemed unsure whether they should use them. Chen looked older than when she had left 50 years ago, but not by much. Advanced medical technology had slowed her aging during the cryosleep, and her eyes held the accumulated wisdom of someone who had spent decades planning for this moment. "Queen General Ziska," she said politely, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "You've certainly kept busy while we were away." Ziska rose to her full, intimidating height, her 6 arms spreading wide in a display of dominance that had terrified countless species into submission. "You are trespassing in Zephyrian space, human. State your business or be destroyed." Chen smiled the way a teacher might smile at a student who had just made an obvious mistake. "This is still council space according to the treaties that established it. Your people agreed to those treaties when they joined. Breaking them doesn't make them disappear." "The council no longer exists," Ziska snarled. "I dissolved it. I am the law here now." "You dissolved the governing body," Chen corrected. "You cannot dissolve the legal framework that created it. That would require unanimous consent from all member species. Since many of those species are currently enslaved or extinct, such consent is impossible to obtain." The legal argument was technically correct, but Ziska had stopped caring about legal technicalities years ago. "Law comes from strength. I am strong enough to make and break any laws I choose." "Are you?" Chen asked conversationally. "Because from where I stand, your strength seems to be having some reliability problems lately." Around the chamber, the few remaining ambassadors watched this exchange with growing amazement. Ambassador Kethvar felt something stirring in his chest that he had not experienced in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that things might actually change. Ziska gestured to her guards, who raised their weapons toward Chen. "You have 10 seconds to explain why I should not kill you where you stand." "Because you're curious," Chen replied calmly. "You want to know how we've been disrupting your operations. You want to know how many of us there are and what we're planning. Most importantly, you want to know why we waited 50 years to return." It was true. Despite her rage, Ziska was intensely curious about the mysterious humans who had vanished and reappeared like ghosts. Her scientific mind wanted answers even as her warrior instincts demanded violence. "You have 5 minutes," she said finally. "Speak quickly." Chen nodded and activated a small device that projected images into the air above them. The first image showed the galaxy as it had been 50 years ago, with human territory marked in blue and council space in various other colors. When we left, we had identified you as a potential threat, Chen explained. Your species showed aggressive tendencies that might destabilize the galactic community. But we also recognized that our presence was becoming part of the problem. The display changed to show polling data and political analyses from the time of humanity's departure. Other species were becoming dependent on human protection or resentful of human influence. Our involvement was preventing the galaxy from learning to solve its own problems. So you ran away, Ziska said with contempt. We gave you a chance, Chen corrected. We removed ourselves from the equation to see if the galaxy could develop stable cooperative institutions without external pressure. We hoped that species would learn to work together for mutual benefit. The display now showed the progression of Zephyrian expansion over the past 50 years. You failed that test completely. Instead of cooperation, you chose domination. Instead of building something better, you destroyed everything we had worked to create. Ziska's exoskeleton rattled with anger. We brought order to chaos. We eliminated the weakness that made species vulnerable to stronger predators. You became the predator, Chen replied. You proved that without someone watching. Some species will always choose to take rather than build, to destroy rather than create. The Queen General leaned forward, her massive form looming over the human admiral. And what do you think you can do about it now? Your species abandoned this galaxy 50 years ago. Whatever strength you once had is gone. We control hundreds of worlds and billions of beings. You are nothing. Chen's expression never changed, but something in her eyes made the Zephyrian guards take an involuntary step backward. We gave the galaxy 50 years to prove that cooperation was possible without our guidance. That experiment has concluded. The results were unsatisfactory. She touched her device again and new images appeared. These showed Zephyrian supply lines, military bases, and communication networks. Each one was highlighted with red indicators showing vulnerabilities and points of failure. While you were conquering the galaxy, we were studying you. Every move you made, every strategy you employed, every technology you stole from other species. We've spent 50 years learning everything about how your empire works. The images became more detailed, showing the exact locations of critical infrastructure and the precise timing of supply deliveries. It was information that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. We know about the biological weapons you used on the Storm Riders, Chen continued. We know about the forced relocations that broke up resistance movements. We know about the quotas that keep your conquered species too busy to organize. We know everything. Ziska felt the first stirring of real fear. The level of intelligence that the humans had gathered was beyond anything she had thought possible. They knew secrets that even some of her own officers were not aware of. Knowledge is not strength, she said, but her voice lacked its previous confidence. Isn't it? Chen asked. Then why are your supply convoys experiencing mysterious failures? Why are your communication networks suffering random interruptions? Why are your most secure facilities reporting impossible security breaches? The Queen General's multiple eyes widened as understanding dawned. You have been responsible for the technical problems. We've been conducting reconnaissance, Chen confirmed. Testing your defenses, identifying weak points, preparing for the possibility that diplomatic solutions might not be sufficient. She gestured to her device one final time, and the display showed a simple message, 10 seconds. 10 seconds until what? Ziska demanded. Chen looked at her watch and smiled. Until you learn the difference between conquest and victory. Throughout Zephyrian space, supply depots that had been operating normally suddenly found their storage bays empty. Communication relays that had been functioning perfectly went completely silent. Transport ships discovered that their cargo holds contained nothing but air, despite sealed manifests showing full loads. In the space around the council station, shapes began appearing on sensor screens. At first they looked like sensor ghosts, but as the minutes passed, they resolved into something that made every Zephyrian officer's blood run cold. Ships, hundreds of them, appearing from nowhere with technology that made them invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. The designs were elegant and deadly, like nothing anyone had ever seen before. They surrounded the station in perfect formation, their weapons clearly visible but not yet targeted. Impossible, Ziska whispered. No fleet that large could approach without detection. Your sensors were detecting them, Chen explained calmly. We simply convinced your computers that they were background radiation. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have 50 years to plan and unlimited resources to implement those plans. The Queen General looked around the chamber at her guards, her officers, and the handful of remaining ambassadors. For the first time in decades, she felt uncertain about the outcome of a confrontation. "What do you want?" she asked finally. Chen's expression remained polite but implacable. "Justice. Reparations for the species you've enslaved. Freedom for the worlds you've conquered. And a galaxy where cooperation is rewarded instead of punished. And if I refuse? Then we remind everyone why the galaxy was so peaceful during our absence," Chen replied. "Your choice, Your Majesty. But choose quickly. Our patience ran out about 50 years ago." The silence in the council chambers stretched for 10 heartbeats before Queen General Ziska made her decision. Her warrior instincts, honed by decades of successful conquests, told her to fight. Her survival instincts, refined by the same experiences, told her to calculate the odds first. Around the station, human ships waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Their weapons remained powered but not yet targeted, sending a clear message. This was still a negotiation, not yet an execution. "You cannot possibly have enough ships to challenge our entire empire," Ziska said, but her voice lacked its previous certainty. "Even if you have 1,000 vessels, we control millions of beings across hundreds of worlds." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right. We don't have enough ships to occupy your territory or garrison your worlds. We don't need to." She gestured to her device again, and the holographic display showed a detailed map of Zephyrian space. Supply lines appeared as glowing threads connecting hundreds of systems, creating a web that looked both impressive and fragile. "Your empire depends on constant movement," Chen explained. "Food shipments from agricultural worlds to industrial centers. Raw materials from mining operations to manufacturing plants. Finished goods from factories to military bases. Energy cells, replacement parts, communication equipment, medical supplies. Everything flows through predictable patterns." The display zoomed in on key junction points where multiple supply routes intersected. "We don't need to conquer your worlds. We just need to interrupt the flow of resources between them. How long can a mining operation continue without replacement parts for its equipment? How long can a factory world feed its population without regular food shipments?" Ziska studied the display with growing horror. Her military mind immediately grasped the implications. The Zephyrian Empire was vast and powerful, but it was also incredibly complex. Every world depended on dozens of others for essential supplies. Breaking even a few key connections would create cascading failures throughout the entire system. "You would starve billions of innocent beings to defeat us," she accused. "Would we?" Chen asked calmly. "Or would we liberate billions of enslaved beings by removing their oppressors' ability to maintain control?" The distinction was important. The humans were not threatening to destroy the Zephyrians' conquered subjects. They were threatening to cut the logistical chains that kept those subjects enslaved. Without regular shipments of surveillance equipment, propaganda materials, and military supplies, individual worlds would regain the freedom to make their own choices. "The beings on those worlds chose to accept our protection," Ziska insisted. "Did they?" Chen touched her device and the display showed communication intercepts from across Zephyrian space. Conversations between family members, separated by forced relocations. Messages from resistance fighters who had been captured and executed. Reports from worlds that had attempted independence only to face mysterious disasters that forced them back into submission. "These are your protection services," Chen said with cold precision. "Terror disguised as security. Slavery dressed up as cooperation. You convince species to accept chains by making the alternative seem worse." Ambassador Kethvar watched this exchange with fascination. For 50 years, no one had spoken to the Zephyrians like this. No one had challenged their authority or questioned their methods. The humans were not just confronting Ziska, they were stripping away the lies that had made her empire possible. "What exactly are you proposing?" the Queen General asked through gritted mandibles. Chen's expression softened slightly, becoming less threatening and more diplomatic. "Immediate cessation of all tribute collection and forced labor programs. Restoration of self-governance to all conquered worlds within 6 months. Reparations to species that have suffered under your rule. and establishment of monitoring systems to ensure compliance. Monitoring systems controlled by humans, I assume. Monitoring systems controlled by the restored Galactic Council, Chen corrected. With human participation but not human dominance. We learned our lesson about species becoming too dependent on us. The offer was more generous than Ziska had expected. Complete surrender would have meant the destruction of her species' military power, and possibly their government. This proposal allowed the Zephyrians to maintain their independence while forcing them to give up their empire. And if we refuse? She asked. Chen looked genuinely sad. Then we implement what we call the Strangler Protocol. We cut every supply line, interrupt every communication network, and disable every piece of infrastructure that keeps your empire functioning. We don't destroy it. We just make it impossible to maintain. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Your people will survive, but your empire will collapse into thousands of isolated worlds, each struggling to maintain basic civilization without external support. It will take centuries to rebuild if it ever happens at all. The choice was clear. Accept a negotiated surrender that preserved Zephyrian civilization, or face a slow strangulation that would reduce them to a collection of primitive worlds. For a species that had built its identity around conquest and expansion, either option was devastating. But as Ziska looked around the chamber at the faces watching her, she realized that the choice was not really hers alone. Her officers were calculating the same odds she was. Her soldiers were wondering if their weapons would be effective against human technology. Even her most loyal subordinates were beginning to question whether continued resistance was wise. I need time to consult with my government, she said finally. Of course, Chen agreed. You have 48 hours to discuss the terms with your superiors. After that, we begin implementation of whatever solution seems most appropriate. The Queen General straightened to her full imposing height one last time. Do not mistake our consideration for weakness, Admiral Chen. The Zephyrian Empire has faced challenges before. I'm sure you have, Chen replied politely. But you've never faced a challenge from a species that spent 50 years studying your every weakness while building technology specifically designed to exploit them. This isn't a war, Your Majesty. It's an intervention. The distinction was both subtle and profound. Wars were fought between equals, with uncertain outcomes and acceptable losses on both sides. Interventions were conducted by superior powers to correct unacceptable situations. The humans were not offering the Zephyrians a chance to fight for victory. They were offering them a chance to surrender with dignity. Over the following 2 days, frantic communications passed between the Council Station and Zephyrian High Command. Military analysts studied the human fleet and reached terrifying conclusions about their technological capabilities. Intelligence officers tried desperately to locate other human forces and found only empty space where logic said, reinforcements should be waiting. The breakthrough came when Zephyrian scientists analyzed the energy signatures from the human ships. The readings were unlike anything in their databases, but computer models suggested power outputs that should have been impossible for vessels of that size. If the projections were correct, each human ship was potentially more powerful than an entire Zephyrian battle group. The final decision came from the Zephyrian High Council itself. Faced with the choice between negotiated surrender and potential extinction, they chose survival over pride. Queen General Ziska returned to the council chambers exactly 48 hours after Chen's ultimatum. Her posture was different now, less dominating and more respectful. She had spent 2 days learning that her empire was built on foundations of sand, and that a species she had dismissed as extinct possessed the power to wash those foundations away. The Zephyrian Empire accepts your terms, she announced formally. We will begin withdrawal from occupied territories immediately and establish reparation protocols within 30 days. Chen nodded graciously. Thank you, Your Majesty. I know this decision was difficult, but I believe it's the right choice for everyone involved. Around the chamber, the remaining ambassadors sat in stunned silence. Change that they had thought impossible was happening before their eyes. Species that had been enslaved for decades were about to regain their freedom. Worlds that had been stripped of resources were going to receive compensation. The galaxy's balance of power was shifting back toward cooperation and justice. But the most amazing transformation was yet to come. Over the following months, as Zephyrian forces withdrew from conquered territories, something unexpected began happening. Instead of chaos and revenge, the liberated species began working together to rebuild what had been destroyed. The crystal collective shared their music with beings who had never heard harmony. The nebula dancers taught navigation techniques to species who had been trapped on single worlds. The tree shepherds offered to help restore ecosystems that had been damaged by industrial exploitation. The humans played a crucial role in this reconstruction, but not the dominant role they had occupied before their disappearance. They served as mediators, advisors, and coordinators, helping different species find common ground without imposing human solutions on alien problems. Admiral Chen established her headquarters in the restored council chambers, which had been rebuilt to accommodate representatives from all surviving species. The new design included sections for the Zephyrians, who were slowly learning to participate in diplomacy rather than dictate through intimidation. The hardest part, Chen explained to Ambassador Kethvar during a private conversation, was learning to trust that other species could solve their own problems if given the chance. The Saurian diplomat nodded thoughtfully. "We wondered why you left so suddenly. Many of us felt abandoned. We saw that our presence was becoming a crutch," Chen replied. "Species were looking to us for solutions instead of developing their own capabilities. We realized that true strength comes from independence, not dependence." Kethvar considered this carefully. "But without your protection, we fell under Zephyrian domination. How is that better than depending on human guidance?" Chen smiled sadly. "It wasn't better. It was a test that most of the galaxy failed. We hoped that removing human influence would allow natural cooperation to develop. Instead, it created a vacuum that aggressive species filled with fear and oppression." "So what happens now?" Kethvar asked. "Do humans become the galaxy's permanent guardians?" "No," Chen said firmly. "We become the galaxy's insurance policy. We maintain the capability to intervene when cooperation breaks down completely, but we don't interfere in normal political processes. Think of us as a safety net that hopefully will never be needed again." The new system that emerged over the following years was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. The Galactic Council was reconstituted with stronger protections for smaller species and clear limits on the power of any single group. Trade agreements were negotiated based on mutual benefit, rather than tribute and exploitation. Disputes were resolved through mediation and compromise rather than force and intimidation. The Zephyrians surprisingly adapted well to the new order. Stripped of their empire but not destroyed, they channeled their aggressive tendencies into competitive sports and exploration of dangerous regions of space. Their military skills proved valuable in protecting trade routes from pirates and natural hazards. Queen General Ziska herself underwent a remarkable transformation. No longer able to rule through fear, she discovered that her intelligence and strategic thinking made her an effective diplomat. She became one of the Council's most valuable mediators, precisely because she understood how aggressive species thought and could predict their behavior. "The irony," she confided to Chen during a council session, "is that cooperation actually makes us stronger than conquest ever did. My people are more prosperous now than they were when we controlled half the galaxy." Chen nodded with satisfaction. "That's the lesson we hoped everyone would learn 50 years ago. Building something together creates more value than taking something apart." But the humans' greatest achievement was not the restoration of peace or the establishment of justice. It was the creation of a system that could survive without them. The new galactic order did not depend on human power or wisdom. It was built on principles that any species could understand and institutions that everyone could participate in. 5 years after the return, Admiral Chen stood in her office looking out at the bustling council district. Ships from dozens of species moved through the space lanes in peaceful commerce. Beings who had been enemies under Zephyrian rule were now partners in joint ventures. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was free. "Admiral?" Colonel Torres entered with the daily briefing files. "The Long Watch monitoring systems are all reporting normal activity. No signs of emerging threats or destabilizing conflicts." Chen accepted the reports but did not immediately read them. "Miguel, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had stayed 50 years ago instead of leaving?" Torres considered the question seriously. The galaxy probably would have remained peaceful, but it would have been a different kind of peace. More dependent on us, less capable of maintaining itself. And when we eventually died or moved on, it would have collapsed anyway, Chen concluded. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone learn from their own mistakes. Even when those mistakes cost billions of lives? Chen's expression grew heavy. That's the burden of having the power to intervene. Every time you choose not to act, you become responsible for what happens afterward. But every time you do act, you prevent others from learning to act for themselves. She turned back to the window, watching a group of young beings from different species playing together in one of the station's parks. They were too young to remember the Zephyrian Empire or the terror it had brought. To them, cooperation was normal and freedom was a given. The galaxy passed its test eventually, she said quietly. It just took longer than we hoped and cost more than we wanted to pay. In her final log entry before stepping down as fleet commander, Admiral Chen wrote, "The long sleep protocol has been officially terminated. The long watch protocol will continue indefinitely, but with minimal interference in galactic affairs. We have learned that freedom cannot be given. It must be earned. Justice cannot be imposed. It must be chosen. And peace cannot be enforced. It must be built by those who will live within it. The galaxy is free again not because we freed it, but because it chose freedom over fear. That choice makes all the difference. That choice makes it permanent. We remain ready to help when asked, to defend when threatened, and to intervene when all other options have failed. But we will never again make the mistake of believing that our solutions are better than everyone else's, simply because they are ours. The humans are back, but more importantly,